Hi, I'm Mike Morse. Welcome to another episode of Open Mic Home Edition. Today, we're going to be talking to a nationally recognized expert on all things indigent counsel. You have been watching this podcast. You understand that I am very concerned with people going to prison wrongfully. We've been talking about exonerations. We talked to Kenny Winenko and Aaron Salter. I've been having tons of meetings. And a lot of the things that I've been finding as I've been reporting is that the first attorney is usually bad. And this has been happening for years, and I'm hoping that it's getting better. But I just reviewed another case yesterday where the first attorney screwed up the trial. Man was convicted for life in prison. He was disbarred and disciplined many times. And this is just a repeating storyline that I keep hearing. So I wanted to bring on David Carroll.
Joining us this morning is Mike Morse, Detroit's top attorney. Mike Morse is in here to tell us about the backpack giveaway.
Adapt and change things up a little bit every year.
Welcome, David.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
I had more of that, but you've been dealing with figuring out the right to counsel services for more than 20 years, providing technical assistance to policymakers at the federal, state, and local levels. You've done numerous research projects and reports. You've testified to Congress in Washington, D.C. So I guess, tell us, first of all, what the Sixth Amendment Center is where you're working now in Boston.
Great. So we're a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit technical assistance provider. I founded the Sixth Amendment Center about 8 years ago to give policymakers a place to go to learn about what they need to be doing to fulfilling the Sixth Amendment, and to get evaluation services and just really to help them do what they need to do to be able to help poor people facing the potential of jail time.
And just so people know, the Sixth Amendment gives everybody the right to counsel.
Yes.
State courts, federal courts, certain appellate offices must appoint at the government's expense adequate counsel.
Yes, in any criminal case in which there's a potential of losing your liberty. So even in cases, in misdemeanor cases where they may offer probation, and if you break probation and you go to jail for that, you should have had adequate, effective counsel at that initial hearing. And a lot of courts don't provide counsel in those cases as they need to.
Every exoneree case that I look at, I haven't looked at all of them. There's hundreds, thank God. But the first glaring bright light that's shining over the whole case is how bad that court-appointed or public defender was. That's irrefutable, right?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there's a national crisis in regards to public defense. A big problem in this country is the lack of attorney at all. I've sat in countless misdemeanor courts across this country where poor people aren't provided a lawyer at all. And then the problem that you're speaking about is if they do get a lawyer, and this is in felony, delinquency, or misdemeanor cases, they may have an attorney who has way too many cases, is appointed far too late in the process to be effective, probably has financial conflicts of interest, and oftentimes with the judge directly presiding in that court if they have a contract directly with that judge. And so it's a big national problem. That's not to say there aren't good places and places that do it well and effectively, but it's more often the case than not that poor people in facing the potential loss of liberty don't get effective counsel in this country.
So let's talk about Michigan, because we're in Michigan. I'm a Michigan lawyer. Podcast reaches all over the world, but I'm mostly concerned with Michigan. How are we doing here in our state?
Well, you're doing much better than you used to. My time in Michigan goes back to 2007. where when I was employed by the National Legal Aid Defender Association, I led a team and wrote a report that looked at 10 counties in Michigan. And at that time, I thought it was the most efficient indigent defense system I had ever viewed. Now, I did have the great fortune, really pleasure and privilege to work with a number of policymakers in your state. The governor at that time formed a task force, appointed really excellent people, and it led to comprehensive legislative reform, creating the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. The problem is you can't just turn on a light switch and have everything fixed overnight. You know, they had to appoint commissioners, they had to hire staff, they had to have all the counties and cities create plans to meet the MIDC standards. And then they had to appropriate the money. So even though the reforms happened in June of 2013, it's really just been the past year where the money has finally started going out to the local governments to be able to fix these problems. So I'm very encouraged. I think the standards that MIDC has set are fantastic, some of the best in the country. But if you're a indigent defendant today in Michigan, you probably are still facing some of these problems.
You know, a lot of these wrongful conviction cases that I'm reviewing, that I'm interviewing people on, that I'm considering taking on, they are older. These are not the last 7, 8 years since your report, which is interesting, and I got to put that in perspective in my brain. And so, let's talk about Wayne County, because Wayne County is our largest county. There are probably more criminal cases there than any other county in Michigan by far.
Yeah.
And there is based upon maybe your report and the commission's recommendation, in the last 2 years, Wayne County has opened an office called the Neighborhood Defender Services, which was an offshoot of a branch in Harlem that has come here with dozens of employees. I've had meetings. People are saying these are fabulous lawyers. These are great, full-time investigators and social workers, and their website looks great. I've been hearing good things. Is that? I mean, but they're only taking 25% of the cases. So I don't know who's getting those other 75% of the cases, which makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
What's the hope here for this aid? I know they got $17 or $18 million to set up a massive new organization. So can you describe, what it was and now what this organization is hoping to do?
Yes. So we did a study there was an existing public defender in Wayne County, a nonprofit that was contracting with the county. We did a study for the county with MIDC funding in April of 2018. It was released. What we found is that for the prior 16 years, Wayne County had flat funded that office. Now, flat funding is kind of a misnomer, because even though you get the same amount of money, it doesn't mean the costs haven't escalated in that time. So the cost of defending poor people, things like licensing fees for Westlaw and things, everything, of course, is going up. So that actually meant that the amount of money available to properly represent people was getting less and less and less. And what that office chose to do was to cut and cut and cut down to the bare bones, so that basically the staff was 16 lawyers, and that was it. No support staff, really, just no social workers, very few investigators. And to give people a sense, they also had salary freezes. So lawyers who had been at the bar for 20 plus years, who were handling murder cases, were earning $35,000 a year. And so that is, to me, is just incredible. But you think about what else that means is over 16 years, the number of criminal cases in Wayne County kept escalating. So the only way to do that without increasing staff is to put more and more on the backs of the attorneys. So to give your listeners a sense, there's some national standards out there that say if you're a felony attorney, you should handle no more than 150 cases in a single year, and that's it. Now, national experts, including myself, think those numbers are outdated, and those numbers should be way below that. Some of our best public defender offices in the country have caseload limits of 40 or 50 cases.
150 sounds like a lot.
Right.
That's,
yeah.
Every other day you're getting a new one.
Right. So you're opening, investigating, closing, and disposing of that case every other day. Now, so think about how high that is, 150. The attorneys in Wayne County were handling 400 to 600 cases a year. I mean, no one, not even, Superman attorney could handle that caseload, no matter how determined. Yeah, exactly. No matter how caring and determined you want to be, you cannot provide effective representation with those types of numbers. So that was what was in Wayne County. With our report, they basically ended that contract with that public defender office, and they put it out to bid, and they selected, as you said, Neighborhood Defender Services, who have an excellent reputation in Harlem, and they just really, I think there's, I don't know the exact numbers, we can ask them, but it's almost tripled the number of lawyers that are in that office now, and doing things by standards that they should have been doing all along. So that is just really, really encouraging that Wayne County, with the funding from the state through MIDC, has gone that direction and said, we really want to do this right. And I have great expectations and hope for that office, knowing the leadership from the Harlem office.
This question just occurred to me. All the cases that on the people who are claiming innocence, mm-hmm. and we're claiming ineffective assistance of counsel, mm-hmm. It's almost every case. It's prevalent. And a lot mm-hmm. of these lawyers from back in the day were bad lawyers. Multiple disciplines. Mm-hmm. A lot of them were disbarred. Most of them are dead by now. And, are the Court of Appeals getting tired of hearing that argument? Is it shaking them up when they see that, or are they just like, oh, ineffective assistance of counsel? Or do you find across the country that the judges are taking that seriously based upon all these exonerations, based upon all these horror stories that we're seeing?
So the problem really in most of the country is that oftentimes the overworked, underpaid, financially conflicted, untrained, unqualified lawyer who does the trial is then appointed to do the appeal. And so the chance of anyone calling ineffectiveness on themselves is impossible, and may not even be heard until it gets to the post-conviction state, where in many states you don't have a right to counsel. So it's really the system is rigged basically for poor people in a lot of places. Now in Michigan, I will say that the state appellate defender office and the managed assigned counsel level on the appellate level has a great national reputation. We haven't ever studied them directly, so I can't say for certain, but I certainly know the people that run it, and I think highly of them. So I do think there's more and more of these types of cases that get a shot in a state like Michigan than you would in many other types of states. So I hope they're not tiring of this, because I think the more and more these type of cases are uncovered, the better the chances of fixing the systemic deficiencies are in the first place.
I'm seeing numbers of that people who get attorneys for felonies, over 80% of them have either a court-appointed lawyer or someone from the public defender's office. Are those numbers accurate?
I would say they're incredibly low. I think it's more like 90 or 93% that are doing it.
So, we had a professor from U of M on last week, Professor Primus, who described the difference between a public defender office, like we were just talking about, at the neighborhood defender services, and just a court-appointed lawyer like myself who could raise their hand and say, hey, I want to make $500, give me a felony case.
Mm-hmm.
Those are pretty much the two ways people get help.
Right.
And that number, is so high. I wonder, I've talked to a couple of people about this. I read these transcripts, and these lawyers don't know how to do a cross-examination. Mm-hmm. They didn't call. I was reading a wrongful conviction case where the person said he was with his girlfriend. The defense attorney never called the girlfriend. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at a gentleman who's spending a life in prison without parole, and the state produced 7 medical doctors, and the defense didn't produce 1. Mm-hmm. And it's like, this is 101. I mean, this literally is stuff they teach you in law school. They don't teach you everything in law school, but this is like, where's the defense? I've had a case where a judge on a friend of mine who's been out now 17 years, served 13 years, served 9 years wrongfully, Kenny Wanenko. Judge gave his second defense attorney 2 days to prepare for a rape, a serious case that he didn't do. It's just mind-blowing, it's just mind-blowing, the facts that you see in these transcripts. I mean, and I guess the question is, there's no panic button that a defendant could press, even a defense attorney who's over their head can press, the judges press, like, wait a minute, we're not ready, this guy's not ready, nobody's ready. It's like blinders. They're just going forward, giving a horrible defense, and then once you're convicted, the rates of overturning those convictions are so ridiculously low that my belief is you need everything that you've been studying for your 20 plus years. That's critical. This is the time to save these people's lives, is in that first, before trial, between bail and trial. That's the time to really prepare and get ready. And in the past, it's just not happening.
Yeah, I think you hit on it when you're talking about when you come out of law school, you're not trained to be a public defender, just as you're not trained to be a prosecutor or a judge. You learn the environment you're thrown into. And so I really think it's a subconscious process here, that people can't see the injustices right in front of them because they've learned the system. And so they say, well, no one around here is objecting to this, therefore it must be okay. A lot of people, when they find out, when the Sixth Amendment Center is doing a report, we always announce what courtroom we're going to be in and let the judges know. And everyone looks shocked, like, why? They're going to be able to, fake it. And my response is, when the systems are as broken as they are in this country, and certainly were in Michigan, they think they're doing it right. And so they welcome you. And I've seen the most horrible abuses right out in the open in public because no one can recognize it for themselves.
Professor Primus last week talked about on her and 2 of her colleagues in the public defender office went down to Wayne County, sat unannounced and watched the process. And there was a public defender there for the day. I don't remember the name. It was a day public defender. Yeah. And that person actually wasn't working for the government, was just a private person, probably making $300, $500, $700 for sitting there, and was acting kind of as the prosecutor and the defense attorney, churning and burning 30, 40 cases in a half a day. And they just all became appalled and set up the Michigan Innocence Clinic. And now we're doing like such beautiful, needed work. But you're right. Anybody could go walk into any courtroom and see some pretty messed up stuff.
I actually really encourage your listeners to do just that. I'm always sort of a little shocked, the number of people who've never stepped inside of a courtroom just to observe what's going on. I mean, especially today in this time where people are really looking for police accountability. That's supposed to be the defense counsel's role, right? They're supposed to be the check against government overreach. And when the system is broken as it is and that we've been discussing, there is no check. And so it is just that churn and burn that you described. I remember back when I was doing the report that I spoke about back in 2008. There was one county that openly talked about their court system as McJustice, that relating it to a fast food process. And they weren't saying that like it was a bad thing. They were saying it like it was, look how efficient we are. Look at how it's going.
Turn them and burn them. Just turn them and burn them. Get everybody to plead guilty. Nobody wants a trial.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that other 75% of the cases in Wayne County, because they are handled by private criminal defense attorneys. We did a
hold on. Let me stop
Sure.
for a second. Is there no longer a public defender other than the neighborhood defender services?
That's correct.
So the other 75% are guys like me, private practice, private pay, want to make some extra money, whether I'm qualified or not. I go down, I put my name on a list, and a judge will hand me a misdemeanor or felony case to handle without really giving me much of a test or checking my knowledge of what I know.
Right. So, and it's worse than that, because there's also financial conflicts of interest in how they pay attorneys in Wayne County. So when we did the study it was published last year in August, they paid lawyers by the event, which means, if you went to visit someone in the jail, I think you got $40 or something like that. But you could only get that one time, right? You couldn't go and see your client 3, 4, 5, 6 times and get paid that flat fee every time. So what do you think the chances are that people would go to the jail to visit people? On top of it, most of the events that you got paid for were only in-court events. So all the work to prepare for trial, there was like one single fee for like $100 or something like that. But attorneys learned, if you really wanted to make money, you had to be in court moving things as fast as possible to do it. So in our report, we found that on average, the amount of money a felony attorney earned per case was about $450 a case. Now, if you're, if you figure that out, that's like spending, 4 hours for, what lawyers should be paid on a case. And it's simply because they're doing this and they've learned the system that to put food on their family's table, they have to churn and burn.
And if a defendant says, I have a good defense to this, I didn't do this, to take it to trial, they don't make that much more.
Right, exactly.
They make a little more, but certainly not. I mean, getting ready for a trial is dozens of hours. It's lots of work. It's 8-hour days, and you're definitely they're not going to compensate you fully for what you should be paid.
Right. Now, there's hope here, too. Wayne County did their homework and contracted with Neighborhood Defender Services. They're in the process of fixing the assigned counsel system. So they're creating an oversight structure so that, the other thing is, in the past, there was no one judging whether that attorney was doing a good job or not. I mean, the best assigned counsel systems in our country have very comprehensive supervision. There are people doing courtroom observations, reviewing court files to make sure that attorneys are doing what they're supposed to. In the past, the only person that might have done that was a judge who can't look in a client's file, who can't talk to a client about their experience. And so, again, these problems are so ingrained, they don't get fixed overnight. But Wayne County is starting down that path of doing a correct version of a managed assigned counsel system. And I think down the road, there will probably be an expansion of Neighborhood Defender Services to get more of the cases than just 25%. But that's sort of my own personal hope.
David, are you up to date on whether or not the judges still control who gets the cases, or has that been delegated to a commission or an office that parts and parcels them out?
So I'm not completely up to date, so I'm not going to speculate on where it is in that process. But what I will say is that in the MIDC statutes, it requires them to draft standards related to the independence of the defense function. And indeed, MIDC has drafted what I consider to be a very good standard on independence. Unfortunately, it hasn't been approved by the state yet. And so that's something that is really needed in your state, is for the MIDC standards to be approved. And so hopefully that is coming soon. And then that will be the point at which the judges will finally be out over the oversight and appointment of all these attorneys.
So let's say you're a indigent criminal defendant and you're given a court-appointed attorney or a public defender who pressures you into trying to plead guilty because this person secretly doesn't want to try the case and doesn't have the time and isn't going to be getting paid enough. What is the recourse for people sitting in jail waiting this trial or out on bail waiting this trial? What can they do?
So it's really, really hard. And you know, it's really hard because poor people often, you know, are undereducated, or maybe have dependency issues or competency issues, mental health problems. So it's really hard to put it on the backs of poor people to try to fix this problem. And so, you know, my advice is that if you should never pressure to do whatever, you know, and I understand a lot of times people will plead because, you know, they want to be out of jail if they're being held pre-trial. We know people do things for maybe not the best reasons, but they really, really need to hold their ground and not be pressured into this. The right to counsel is the right of the individual. And they're the people making the decision in their case, right? The lawyer can only advise, but the lawyer is supposed to do what's in the stated interest of the client themselves. And
but
it's tough.
You right. So you haven't even. So my only thought, and tell me if this is a terrible idea, but if I was sitting in jail waiting trial and I know I didn't do it, and the defense attorney, my attorney, is saying they have this evidence, and you know you can get 6 months if you plead guilty, or if you get convicted, you're going to get up to 10 years. Plead guilty. The only thing that person can do is, if they know that they're innocent, is either find themselves another attorney, however they personally can, or get in front of that judge, get a note to the judge, get something on the record. Your Honor, I didn't do this. My lawyer says I should plead guilty because he doesn't want to take this to trial, and I need a better, more qualified attorney who's going to take me to trial and protect my rights.
Certainly, getting it on the record is great if people have the ability to do that.
And like you said, a lot of these people are uneducated. They don't know that they have the right to do that. And a lot of judges aren't going to give them that opportunity, but they need to figure out a way to be that squeaky wheel to get in front of that judge and implore that judge to get them a better attorney, in my opinion, and create a record that, you know, continue to hit home on the innocence that I didn't do this. And I mean, that would certainly help down the road if, God forbid, there has to be an appeal, but the judge could deny it, but because they don't have to give them another attorney. They could talk to the attorney. They could tell that attorney to go to trial. And then is that attorney going to be pissed off at the client? Is that attorney going to give it to them? It's all, okay, you want your day in court? I'll give you your day in court.
And so it really is tough. Now, again, as we're saying, I am hopeful that Michigan is on the right path, that this won't be a problem in the future. But it is still currently a problem. And so, you know, I would like to see people, citizens, doing courtroom observations. You know, it doesn't, people often will say, well, you know, not being a lawyer, how can I judge whether the lawyer is doing a good job or not? And I say, you know, just go down and sit in a courtroom. You can tell when things are off the rails.
Even as a lawyer for almost 30 years, sitting in a criminal courtroom is different. And just seeing the crimes that come up, seeing the people in the gallery, seeing the defendants, seeing the people come out in shackles from, I mean, it's everybody should witness that at least once. I agree with you. Let's talk about bail for a second. I'm recently learning how, I would use an F word here, but how screwed up the bail system is in America. And I don't know if you've spent any time researching bail, but I've seen statistics, David, that if you're awaiting bail and you can't afford to get out, you're 92% more likely to take that plea so you can go home than if you get out on bail, you're only pleading guilty 50% of the time, like half. Just because people plead guilty just to get out of jail, even if they didn't do it.
So the numbers you're quoting, the numbers you're quoting certainly feel right. So I'm not going to object to your premise at all, because that's what we see. I got these
from the Bail Project, the National Bail Project.
I would trust them.
I met with two of the young ladies who are running the Detroit Bail Project yesterday for coffee, and I'm learning about the problems of bail. They told me a story how there was a woman who was given $1 bail, and she couldn't post it. And they had to come in and bail her out for $1. This is an amazing organization, the Detroit Bail Project. Up to $5,000. They have lots of money. They told me that they could bail out almost every person in Michigan jails or in the Tri-County area right now if they called them. And have you studied bail reform? Have you studied the problems with bail?
Well, we certainly study the lack of counsel at bail hearings and the need for them. There's a great quote by the U.S. Supreme Court in a case called Chronic v. United States, and they say of all the rights that an accused person has, the right to be represented by counsel is the most pervasive, for it affects the ability of that person to exert any of the other rights he may have. I might be a little off on the quote, but that's the gist of it. And it's so true. You can't, public defenders are supposed to be there fighting for bail reductions or no bail. But in most of the country, they aren't representing people at bail hearings. And that is really the things that you're quoting, the numbers are absolutely true from what we've seen. And, so people in your listening audience understand we're one of only 2 countries left in the world that has monetary bail, the other one being the Philippines. I mean, it just isn't done. And there's no proof that bail improves the rate at which people come back to court. And really, just because someone has money doesn't mean they're not a public safety threat. So we really should be getting rid of monetary bail and really looking at, whether there's a public safety need to have someone in jail pre-trial.
I'm with you. I'm learning about the bail system, and it's atrocious. And thank God for the Bail Project. Thank God that people are getting bailed out who can't afford it. Because you're right. Even $500 bail, a lot of people in Wayne County can't afford that and will sit there until they either plead guilty or await trial. And it's just, that's just a nightmare. It's a nightmare scenario.
Right. So, and just to sort of put it in further context, right? They are sitting in jail on taxpayers' money, right? It costs a lot of money to house somebody. And so if you're in jail, 2 weeks, 2 months, whatever it is, before you're allowed to get out or to have your day in court, that's costing the taxpayers of Michigan a lot of money. And so, especially at this time when we're talking about reallocating justice dollars from different parts of the criminal justice system, the back end is keeping people in jail is the most expensive way possible to deal with behavior that we either are afraid of or don't like. And we really need to be talking about shrinking the size of the criminal justice system altogether, getting rid of cash bail. all of this is stuff that the Black Lives Matter movement is really bringing to the fore right now. And I'm encouraged that people are finally starting to have these conversations and looking at what the criminal justice system is really like.
How did we get away from allowing people to go in front of an arraignment, which is where they set the bail amount without an attorney? Are you saying, are they not entitled to an attorney at the arraignment?
At the arraignment, you are. Now, just because you're entitled to it doesn't mean you get one, right? So,
okay.
But the U.S. Supreme Court has said that an arraignment is a critical stage at which you must have counsel. It's just that people often ignore what the Supreme Court says. They have never been asked specifically the question on do you have should a bail hearing be considered a critical stage? So it's a little ambiguous right now. And it's also ambiguous because in a lot of the country, the bail hearing and the arraignment happens at the same time, but it doesn't always. They can be different events. Oftentimes you're, within 48 hours, you'll get some sort of video bail hearing or something like that before a judge, and it's all sort of done not in the public view. And so it's hard for people to understand exactly what happens in those events.
I'll make a note here. I don't know in Detroit, because I don't do criminal defense work. I'm a injury lawyer, but you're right. A lot of that is video hearings, and a lot of that is just the judge, $500, $500, $500, $1,000. Right. They don't have a flight risk. They don't need to be paying bond. And this another statistic, because I've done my homework, Dave, is over 90% of the people who the Belle Project, it's not their money, the Belle Project's giving the money for them, come back to court. Over 90%. So the thought that bail is what's bringing them back to court absolutely isn't true. And the Belle Project's numbers support that, prove it wholeheartedly. Right.
And let's just assume that someone has, a minimum wage job or, does occasional work part-time or something like that. Isn't it better to have them out earning money and contributing to the tax base than sitting in jail at the taxpayer's expense? I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
I wonder if the prosecutors and the judges know that they're going to plead guilty if we keep them in there, rather than letting them go home, be with their family, get attorneys, sit down and really figure this out. I really wonder. I don't know if that's, back in the day, this could be just a long-standing thing. New judges come in and they're like, this is what we do. It's $500. It's $1,000. It's just been going on forever.
It's that unconscious ethical blindness. It's the system they learned. I actually, because I have traveled all across the country, I've got to say most people who are criminal justice stakeholders, whether they're judges, prosecutors, defense, probation, you name it, I think most people go into it trying to give back to their community, trying to do, a good job. I don't see a lot of people consciously trying to say, hey, let's undermine these people's right to an attorney. It just happens. And it's because it's been going on for so long. It really takes, organizations like myself shining a light on it, or, I think very highly of the ACLU and the lawsuits they've brought across the country. Those are the types of things that can illuminate this and sort of break people free from that subconscious ethical blindness to say, I didn't see it, even though it was happening right in front of me.
Well, thank you for helping shine some light on this troubling topic. I'm hoping that these new agencies will help. I'm hoping all the other counties in Michigan, are following the commission's guidelines that you helped, set up or recommend that they set up. Really, really good stuff. And I appreciate you being here on Open Mic today.
My pleasure. And now I have to go back and watch Eve Primus on your show because I haven't seen that yet. So
she's great. You should check out the Wrongful Conviction podcast with Kenny Wanenko.
I did see that one.
You did?
Yeah.
How heartbreaking is that story?
I mean, it's terrible. I mean, and I was giving praise to the ACLU. I also have to give a shout out to the Innocence Project. I think really their uncovering of all these wrongful convictions is really a seed that was planted when they started up years ago. That's really coming to fruition because people are finally understanding people in jail aren't all guilty. And that's been an incredible boom for criminal justice reformers like ourselves, for them to be able to find those stories and show them to the world.
And that's one reason we're trying to showcase them here on our podcast, because these people's stories. I mean, I've been privileged to sit with Kenny and Aaron Salter, and I had lunch this week with David Moran up at the Innocence Clinic in Michigan. These professionals put their whole lives, their hearts, their souls into bringing justice where there was no justice. And these are not close calls.
Right.
They're working on a case right now with a gentleman in prison over 33 years, Kensu, who he was 400 miles away from the crime when it was committed. Kenny that couldn't have done it in a million years, nor could have Aaron Salter. Had they had good counsel, which we talked about for the first half hour of this podcast, none of this would have happened. They would not have been locked away for 9 or 13 years or 30 years. That's where, as a lawyer, I am so upset, so offended. That's why I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. That's why I'm sitting in courtrooms. That's why I'm talking to people like you to try to figure out, where there is no simple fix. But the defense, Michigan Indigent Defense Commission is definitely a massive start here in Michigan. Funding it is a huge thing. Getting good attorneys to do the cases, getting good attorneys to do the appeals, which I'm starting to look into to see what we can do as a firm, because this injustice, I don't want any family to have to deal with. And after meeting these people and seeing their beautiful hearts and and reading their stories, it's just heartbreaking. Like, have you seen the movie Just Mercy yet?
I haven't, but I have read the book and I know Brian. So
my college age daughter told me to watch it. My middle daughter and I watched it, sobbing the whole time. But that case, for the reason I brought it up is because for whoever's watching, listening to this, watch Just Mercy on, I believe, Netflix. Maybe not Netflix, but Just Mercy. And what happened in that case with the bad prosecution, the bad cops, the bad judge, the jailhouse snitch is so cookie cutter. What I'm seeing is like, oh, another jailhouse snitch. Oh, another bad cop who doesn't give a shit about justice. Oh, judge who conservative doesn't care. It's like there's like a playbook for wrongful convictions that Professor Primus lays out. But be curious, send me an email after you watch it. Let me know what you thought of that.
Will do.
Real smart person who's doing some great work.
I agree.
Shedding a light. Sounds like they're producing some really good lawyers who are giving back. She gave a story how she looked at her students and said, every one of you in the next 2 years must take on one of these indigent cases and do a great job and follow these steps. Because even though you're only out 2 years, you're going to do a lot better job than people who do this 40 or 50 years who are just doing this to make a buck. And anyway, we could go on and on and on. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for doing the research. And please stay in touch.
Will do. And just for your listeners, please go to our website. They have the reports there that you can look at on Wayne County in particular. There's been a bunch of blog posts that I've done on Michigan. They're all there. People can educate themselves on how bad these problems are.
David, will you please email me or Ryan or Kevin all of your information, all of your social media handles, so we can put them in our notes?
Absolutely. Pleasure.
All right. David Carroll, Executive Director, Sixth Amendment Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks.
You never know who you're going to see.
I beat one guy one-on-one my whole career. It's timing. It's for the clinching goal to bring the trophy back.
What you're going to hear.
We got a lot of desperate people in the city. They're desperate because they don't have opportunity.
or what they've got to say.
When you can take people inside of a crime, show them things they wouldn't normally see.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's what you're going to hear on my podcast, Open Mic. Find it where you find your podcasts.
Thank you for watching another episode of Open Mic with David Carroll here today. Fascinating discussion about indigent counsel and things that need to be done and tips to keep you safe and talking bail and all these kind of things. So I hope you found it interesting. Please share it. Please like it, comment away, email me if you have any questions or ideas for other shows. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel or any other podcast channel where you're listening to this. Thanks again. See you next time.